Well, hi, Emily. Welcome to the Moms of Tweens and Teens podcast. I'm so excited that you're here.
I'm really happy to be here, Cheryl. Thanks for having me.
You're so welcome. And we are going to talk about such important challenges that we have raising tweens and teens today. We're going to talk about your new book, which comes out in September. Super exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Autonomy-Supportive Parenting, reduce parental burnout, and raise competent, confident children.
Yes, a bit of a mouthful, but there's a lot packed into the book.
Yeah, no, I love it, and I love the book, and I want to launch and have you just share a little bit about yourself. You have 3 kids, I believe, and what led you to write this book.
Sure. So my kids right now are 8, 11, and 13. So I am well in the tween and teen years, and with one more following, although he sometimes acts like a tween. But so my background is actually, I'm a clinical psychologist by training, and I spent the first almost decade of my career working in academic medicine in large children's hospitals, working with kids with medical conditions and their families. So I've always worked with kids, teenagers, parents, families, but it was in a very different capacity. During that time is when I became a mother and realized, despite my extensive training in families and child development and parenting, that I still did not really know what I was doing and felt really adrift much of the time as a new mother, which really shocked me. And I am by nature a perfectionist. I like to know what I'm doing and do it well. Parenting is not meant for perfectionists. So I started looking at the guidance that was out there, and I was a little disappointed and sometimes dismayed at the kind of parenting guidance that was not well informed by what I knew was out there in the literature about children and families, that it wasn't good guidance for parents, and in fact often would contribute to feeling like a failure or feeling more shame. One example is, I could never do the baby wearing that was all the trend when I was a new mother. I could not the little baby would just slip down my body and it would send me into a panic. And so I just let it go and realized I'm not a baby wearer. I knew that I could still have a very secure attachment with my child without baby wearing. So that's just one example where I saw just these limitations in the parenting guidance. And I worried about other mothers who didn't have the same background to be so critical about the guidance. So I kind of started thinking about writing my own parenting book. And as I had 3 kids in 5 years, I was like, this parenting of the day that's super involved with the kids, it's not for me. I'm exhausted and I don't have a lot to give to my kids. And so I started looking around and I started calling it lazy parenting, this idea of encouraging self-sufficiency and kind of do it yourself while mommy rests right over here. And I realized I kind of stumbled onto this autonomy supportive literature, and I realized there's this huge evidence base for why it's actually good and healthy for parents to be doing less for their children. I mean, that's kind of the nutshell. So that's kind of the whole path from my own professional background, becoming a mother myself, and kind of blending my personal and professional experiences.
Yeah, thank you. For sharing that, because I loved how you said, here I am, I'm in the field and I understand, and yet I'm a perfectionist. And then you had your first child and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm shocked. I was curious, like, what were you shocked about when you became a new parent that you thought would be different?
I felt anxious about everything.
Yeah.
Was her sleep okay? Was I feeding her okay? Was I responsive enough? I mean, I just felt so insecure because of course she's going to cry and need me, and she's not always going to be in a good mood, which applies directly to tweens and teens, right? But I realized, there's such little infrastructure support for new moms. I didn't have a lot of money while I was taking my maternity leave. And so that was cut short. I went back to work when she was 12 weeks old. I did that for all 3 kids. And I was just exhausted. So I feel like I wasn't as present as I wanted to be, which then led me to feeling guilty, like I wasn't connected enough to my kids, even though I think part of that is the social cultural messaging that we need to be super hyper connected to our kids to be good parents. And that's what I realized was infiltrating.
Oh man, that is so, I just relate so much to you about the perfectionism and how anxious I was. And I was trying to do it all perfect, reading every parenting book, thinking, oh my gosh, I'm falling short. I'm not, I don't have them in the snuggle on the front of me for the attachment. And so then I'm failing. And then fast forward to when they're tweens and teens, and then they really get moody.
Mm-hmm.
And they are fighting for that independence.
Yes.
And they're making mistakes. And then because they're making mistakes, you can feel like you're failing because it's loaded.
It's very loaded. And I think that's one of the downfalls of our parenting culture right now, is this tendency to let our children's mistakes reflect our parenting when they really don't need to be connected. So we see it as, that's a referendum on my parenting. I haven't been doing a good job if they did that post on social media, for example. Instead of seeing it as, this is actually how they learn and what needs to happen for their own healthy development. But if we interpret it as a reflection of our parenting, we are going to respond in a very different way to our child, right? Than if we see it as a normal part of growing up.
Yes, we will. We'll be fueled with, we'll be, to use the buzzword, triggered, right?
Yeah.
And it's a reflection of us. And then you put all this personal stuff on it, and then our reaction is much bigger than it needs to be.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about the driving force to the book. And you talk about moving from full service to self-service. And I thought that was so catchy. And I want you to explain what that means.
So in this culture of intensive parenting, we have all, I feel, and this is based on my own personal experience in my community, as well as my work as a therapist, is we have become programmed that we're supposed to be available at all times for our children's needs. And that has trickled into things like doing a lot of things for them that they can do themselves. I was at the gym once and I heard this group of mothers all complaining about their middle schoolers, asking them every morning to fill up their water bottles. And I was laughing, and I didn't know them, but I had to say, mine does the same thing. And it's like, you can fill up your own water bottle. So
it's just the littlest things, right? Yeah. And, it's like reminding that you have to keep reminding and reminding and reminding.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think the bigger picture of autonomy-supportive parenting is this idea that we want to raise our children to be capable adults. I mean, I don't know a parent that is not their mission, right? That their child will eventually be an adult who can live in the world independently.
Yes.
But what we're doing in the meantime is a lot of things for them that they are capable of doing. And then they get used to this full service lifestyle, because who wouldn't enjoy everything being cooked and cleaned and packed for them, right? Sounds great to me. But we're burning ourselves out by taking on so many tasks that they can do. and not even realizing it. I think parents don't even question, maybe they can do this for themselves. So it's just, I think, become kind of this cultural vicious cycle that's come along with intensive parenting.
And I love that in the book, you're raising that self-awareness, because like you said, I don't think we realize what we're doing. We don't realize the message that we're sending to our kids is, I don't think you're capable. Like when we're
Exactly.
doing things for them, it's like, I don't believe on some level that you can do this for yourself, which is what you talk about.
Yes. So one of the autonomy supportive strategies is this expressing trust in your child's skills and expecting independent behaviors. So when I was writing this book, I really took all of this to heart and became very aware of how much more I could be doing, even though I felt like I instinctually was a very autonomy supportive parent in theory. But I realized all these ways that I wasn't, I was taking things over, and it was very, like you said, it's just very automatic. We don't realize we're doing it. So as I was writing the book, it was really a transformation for me as well, to just open my eyes to all these areas that I could step back and expect more of my children.
I love it. Can you give some specific examples so we can all raise our hands?
Yeah. Well, one is the whole chore routine, right? And there are statistics about how the rates of kids doing chores has dropped significantly since
Yeah.
our generation has become parents. And unfortunately, I think it's tied to the uptick of prominence of sports and activities, and they take so many hours and rigorous academics that parents don't want other things to get in the way of kids spending time on those activities. But we have a chore routine in our house that is very autonomy supportive, in the sense that we have a list of possible chores, and every year when the school year starts, the kids pick of the list which chores they're going to do. And the older needs more responsibilities. So each year they take on more than the year before. So there's a leveling up, right? And they get to pick, we have a chart with the days, they get to pick when they do which chores. And if they have something come up that takes a lot of time, like one of my daughters is a competitive gymnast, and she'll have a meet that takes hours out of the weekend, she still has to figure out how to do that chore. So there are no excuses. The only excuse is when they have a birthday, they get the day off. But
I love that.
Yeah. There are things that I think we don't think of our kids being able to do. Like my husband one day was painting, he was working on painting our back stairs. And he was 7 at the time. Our son was like, I want to help. And I could see my husband just imagining the mess that like our 7-year-old could make with white paint on our wooden deck. And I said, honey, this is the critical point of messaging, that we trust him and we expect them to help with these tasks. And this is like, we got to seize the opportunity. And so he figured out a way to do it it was like painting over here, the wood that my husband could paint later. There was a kind of a compromise involved. But I think it's that kind of seeing those opportunities as well, and realizing they can do more than we give them credit for.
Oh my gosh, that's such a good example, especially if you're a perfectionist. Like I am a recovering perfectionist, and you don't want them to mess something up. You don't want them to make a mess.
Yep.
You want them to do it right.
Yep.
But how we end up shutting them down from helping in the future. And then we wonder why they don't want to do it.
Exactly.
And micromanaging, like even loading the dishwasher. I used to do that. It's like, okay, this is where the plates go. You're not doing it right. And not that we don't want to choose them or teach them how to do things properly. But if we're doing that too much and intervening and micromanaging, then they're not going to want to do it either.
No, it completely undermines their internal motivation. And autonomy-supportive parenting as a framework is all about increasing kids' internal motivation. So this is why this is kind of the deeper part. This is why these strategies are effective, is that they help empower kids to be motivated to do things that they didn't want to do before. Not all the time, I'm not going to make, overpromise this, but I think that, I mean, if you think how you feel as an adult when someone is constantly correcting you,
Oh,
it feels terrible, and you give up, you want to stop. It's not enjoyable, and you don't want to go do that again. So I think it's remembering like what it's really like for our child to hear that and be corrected and being told it's not done right, rather than, there's room for coaching of, okay, you've got this part down. Great job. Now I'm going to show you how to do the next part to be even better at it. I mean, there's a way to do it that you're teaching rather than correcting.
I love that. Like affirm what they're doing well.
Yes.
And then you can say, and I loved how you said that. Say that again. So if you can remember,
Yeah.
it's like, okay, you've got this part down, and here, this part, we, need to work on a little bit,
Yep.
or
Yep.
let me show you. Yeah.
Yes. I'm going to show you how to do it, even like an even more advanced way. I mean, help them feel like it's them being ready to do it better. Like it's a compliment, that you're ready to do this even better.
So there's 3 parts to autonomy parenting. So can you tell us what those 3 are? Trust is one.
Well, okay. So to back up a little bit, the autonomy
Okay.
supportive parenting framework is part of this bigger theory called self-determination theory. It's well known in psychology. It applies to all humans, not just kids. But this is important because it's where autonomy supportive parenting gets its principles. So there are 3 fundamental human needs for all of us. One is autonomy, one is competence, and the third is relatedness. So we haven't really talked about relatedness as much, but that's the idea of being connected in a safe and secure relationship, having a sense of belonging in a community. So those have been researched around cultures around the world as 3 fundamental human needs that when are met, we have better life satisfaction, better psychological health, better performance in school and work. So they're really important to all of us. So within autonomy supportive parenting, in terms of how to meet those needs of kids across all ages, from toddlers through, teenagers, is about 10 strategies, which I won't go into all of them, but some of them we've already talked about. So that includes expecting independence, expressing trust in your child, scaffolding, which is the fancy word for meeting them where they're at and then pushing them to the next level. So there's kind of this set of strategies within it. So what we haven't talked about yet, which are more kind of in the mainstream parenting guidance already, so I don't feel like I need to emphasize them as much, but is the idea of taking our children's perspectives and using a lot of empathy in our responses to them. So there's the connection piece and the relatedness piece. So, I mean, we all know it makes sense that the safer we feel in a relationship, the more we're going to push ourselves and explore our world and do things that feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. I'm thinking of how, and you talk about this, if we're so busy micromanaging, giving advice, telling our kids how to think, what to do, they're pulling away at this age, we're going to get in the way of that, having that empathy and modeling that for them. So that's so interesting that you talk about that, because we do get in the way when we're getting in there and trying to manage versus just really listening and problem solving.
Yes.
And that's kind of what you're referring to, right?
Right. And really checking like as a parent, your immediate reaction is likely emotional and may not be what's really happening. So being able to take that pause, step back, and come at it with more curiosity than reactivity to say, I wonder why my child did that. And I'm going to ask.
Yeah.
And I have a story of when this really hit home for me while I was writing about this, and it was so in my head. She was 12 at the time, I heard through the grapevine that she did something with a friend that sounded not great. And when I told my husband about it, we were really upset, and felt like these aren't our values around how we treat people. And it was upsetting to us that our child was acting against these values. And we were heated. I mean, doing that ranting thing in the kitchen together, and he said, well, what does your framework say we should do?
I love it.
So I had to actually ask myself the same question. And I said, well, first we really need to think about maybe where she was coming from and ask her some open-ended questions rather than starting to lecture her. But before that, you and I need to calm down. So we took some time, we kind of let it sit a little bit. And then when we had an opportunity, we sat her down and kind of asked more open-ended questions rather than going straight to the, why would you do this? The lecture. And it ended up being a really important conversation with a lot of genuine emotion and connection. And I just realized how much would have been lost if we had gone for our immediate reaction. So it was really, really stuck with me.
That is very powerful. And we can assume, just like you said, we can have so many emotions when we find out something. Of course, they're going to make mistakes.
Right.
And then we end up reacting in a way that shuts them down.
Yes.
And it's not connecting. They don't feel heard. They don't feel understood. They feel shame.
Right. Exactly. Which is the most disconnecting emotion.
Yeah. And then they don't want to open up and talk to us.
Right.
So how beautiful that you did that and it ended up being emotional.
Yes.
So I'm imagining there were some tears involved.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. A lot came out. And it was kind of beautiful that it also was with both of us, with mom and dad together. And the three of us had this sort of deep conversation about bigger issues all together for a 12-year-old. I mean, it was an important time developmentally for her too, to feel like she could do that with us.
Yeah. A pivotal moment.
Yeah.
In your relationship.
And I want, when I talk about autonomy supportive parenting, I want to be clear that it doesn't mean we use empathy and curiosity so all behaviors are free, just act however you want. There's still these very important behavioral expectations that should be in place for their growth and development, because that is part of parenting too, is having good limits and boundaries. So I like to just point out that nuance is that you can be really connected with empathy and taking their perspective and expect different behaviors.
Yep. That they're not, that it's not a separate thing. I think that's
Right.
good, because sometimes you listen, you're thinking, oh, well, they're just telling me it's okay. But what you're saying is I think what you're saying, tell me if I'm accurate in this, is that first you want to do the connecting and be curious, and then you can have that conversation.
Yes. And so one of my favorite parts of writing the book was I got to write a bunch of vignettes, really based in very realistic interactions and dilemmas for parents and their kids. And I do it across age groups. So there's early childhood, elementary age, and then teenagers. And it's really fun actually, because I have the controlling responses and then the autonomy supportive responses.
Oh, good.
So it's really easy to visualize and just see it right in front of you of the contrast, and then kind of thinking about, okay, so the controlling would be really easy in the moment And it was very easy for me to come up with those examples because I've done many of them. But when you see the autonomy supportive response, you can see how much richer the interaction ends up being than a controlling response.
I love that. Because we need scripts. We need to
Yeah.
say, okay, that's what I say, or doesn't
Right.
mean we're going to do it perfectly, but you can
Which is
recognize
fine.
it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so this was my mission with this book was there are 30 years of academic articles about this. And to read them, you don't really know what to do. It's like, oh, in this one lab, this happened, or in this study of questionnaires, they found this. But my mission was to kind of pull it all together and make it real, and translate it to real life, what it would really mean to parents. So in some ways, it's my interpretation and not pure science, but in other ways, I feel like that's the most useful for parents, is to have that
Oh,
translation.
yeah, you're cutting through all the clutter and of things that are really heady, and
Yeah.
you're simplifying that and making it really practical
Yes.
for parents.
Yes.
Yeah, which is so good. I had to say, when you were telling the story about your daughter, which is so sweet, just what a tender moment. It's so easy to assume things that, and then we lose that opportunity also to have that conversation with our kids. And I wonder, did you notice you were assuming a lot based on
Yes.
what you found out, but it wasn't exactly what you thought it was?
No. And we really got to hear and understand many more elements to the situation. And of course, looking back, of course, we wouldn't have known that from the first way we heard it, because it wasn't from her and we weren't there. So we were kind of falling into this trap that actually our tweens and teens fall into, right? Is kind of hearing one thing and taking it as truth and not investigating or being curious about it. So yeah, and I feel like in writing the book, I've gotten much better at taking that pause in parenting moments to check myself. And I write about this importance of being really attuned to your own emotional response in the moment. And when you feel yourself heating up, knowing that you should probably take a break, because you're not going to respond in a way that you're going to feel good about, and being able to even take that pause. It can be a few seconds, a few minutes, an hour, whatever is needed, to then come back to the situation and deal with it in a way that feels like it's aligned with your values, which is another part of autonomy supportive parenting. Is part of having autonomy is behaving by your personal values. So as a parent, you're trying to model and teach for your kids how to live by certain values. We're going to mess up. So I'm not like, we're all going to have our moments. It's not perfection by any means, but it's at least a guiding light. And although our kids may end up with a different set of values, their values may not be ours directly. I think it's an important reminder for all of us of what we're doing in parenting in the big picture.
Yeah, I like that. Pause, slow down, notice what you're feeling, because it never goes anywhere good when we're coming into a conversation, we're all heated. It's not gonna end up creating that connection like you had with your daughter.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, I really want to address that you don't need to do this every interaction. There's
That
so
would
much.
be exhausting, which we're not,
Yeah.
and you don't have to do it perfectly.
No. So to have pressure on every interaction with your child, that's too much. It's just not helpful for anyone. So I think it's also practicing self-compassion, grace for our own humanity, and the idea that we are doing the best we can. We love our children fiercely and deeply, and we're going to make mistakes. And in fact, apologizing to our children for those mistakes is very healthy and good for their development as well. I always say autonomy supportive parenting is not an identity, it's a practice. So it's not I'm a helicopter parent or a snowplow parent or whatever. It's every morning I wake up and I hope to be as autonomy supportive as possible that day. And some days are harder than others. And it's not all about us. I mean, our kids have really rough days and it's a two-way thing. And there are days that we just aren't going to respond in an autonomy supportive way. And it does not mean you've ruined everything by any stretch of the imagination. It's more the bigger picture of do we have an autonomy supportive home overall?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. No, I appreciate you saying that because I know that so many of our listeners are really hard. We're so hard on ourselves.
Yeah.
You talk a lot about that, about how we can put so much pressure on ourselves. And you talk about the good enough parent,
Yes.
which I love. I love that term. I forget who
Yes.
coined it, but the good enough parent. Can you speak a little bit to that, being the good enough parent?
Well, first, I would ask people to remember their childhoods and how detailed they remember every day. Right? If you think about it, it's kind of a blur. Now, I'm exempting like traumatic experiences, obviously, but more of the general growing up childhood experiences with your parents. We do not remember every little thing that happened. We remember the general feeling we had, right? So I think that's one thing to just kind of take a step back and have that perspective first. And then second, I write a lot about how if we are so stressed about how good our parenting is, we're actually undermining that very mission, because the more stressed we are, the less available and responsive we are to our kids. So the more we can be, self-compassionate and let things go and see the bigger picture, the more relaxed we are. And then the more our kids like enjoy being around us and there's more connection. And they also are learning they don't have to be perfect. So I think we forget that part too. Our kids are watching us. And if we demand perfection from ourselves, they will follow suit and feel like they have to do the same thing many times. So I think it's remembering like we're also doing this for the betterment of our kids, to show them that it's okay to make mistakes, to not act how we always want to act, but then take responsibility and apologize and show the love in other ways.
Because we're all going to mess up and our kids are going to mess up, but
Yep.
it's like the word that you used was safety. It's going to create this environment in our home where our kids are going to feel safer.
Yeah.
And I find working with moms, if you grew up in a really critical home, that, it's like we're trying so hard to overcompensate for that, but we don't realize, and you talk about this too, that we end up transferring that to our kids.
Yes.
And we don't mean to, we want to do it differently.
So
And
that's the irony is the parents I know in my life and who I work with are so well-intentioned. I mean, they love their kids so much, and this is all to be the best for their kids. What I'm trying to point out in my writing is that we're undermining ourselves and our relationships with all the pressure. Like, we can dial it down and everything's going to be okay. I spent years working in the child protection system. Like, I've seen what really damages children, and I have that bigger perspective. Losing our temper and yelling sometimes, it's really okay. And some people have a hard time hearing that, but the science supports it. I promise, it's okay.
Our kids are going to yell at us, and that doesn't make them bad kids.
No, exactly. So starting with ourselves, having that grace for ourselves, and then that shows our children, and it makes us more relaxed and open. And it's better for everyone.
Absolutely. Gosh, I just feel like my shoulders come down when you talk.
Good.
Yeah,
I give myself pep talks all the time.
Yeah. Well, and it's, your book will help because it's like you have to keep reading this and just absorbing it and taking it in and have that self-awareness that we can, you know, where we might be able to relax a little bit and enjoy this, you know, enjoy our kids more.
Yeah. And I always say we should be aiming for influence, but we don't have control.
Mm. Yes.
And I just want to really acknowledge there are kids out there for whatever mix of reasons are more difficult to parent. Many of those kids may be amazing adults, but they are harder to parent.
Yeah.
And that is, I'm sure people with multiple kids can really speak to this as I can. You know, you can be the same parent and have a very different response from each kid. So I think it's also like it's not all about us. Like there's a two-way interaction here, you know?
Oh yeah. All the moms with strong-willed kids are like,
Yeah.
yeah. And then I always say you try to be their brakes and steering. You know, you're trying if they're a tween or a teen in there trying.
Yes.
I did that with my oldest. It does not work.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is out of fear.
Yep.
And then when we're scared, we want to control.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
that usually does not go very well. But if we can let go of that control, we're going to have greater influence.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, so much good stuff, but I want to make sure that we take a little time because you talk about fear and even the statistics. It was just comforting to know what the statistics are, even with our kid getting snatched. We're so worried and you hear all about the trafficking now and so fearful. We don't want to let our kid get on their bike. We don't want to let them go to the mall. I mean, of course, age is you have to think about taking those baby steps. What is that going to look like? But speak a little bit to what's happening because of how afraid we can be.
Yes. And of course, the pandemic, I think, heightened all of that because we became so immersed in this fear of our children's very well-being and physical safety that it was hard then to separate that out from the rest of their lives, right? It became this kind of driving baseline fear about their well-being. And I know when my daughters were 8 and 10 that summer, they had little to do, but they wanted to go on bikes around the neighborhood with their friends. And I remember the moment they took off on their bikes down my driveway, I had this pit in my stomach that was completely illogical. I'm very privileged to live in a safe neighborhood, and it's good for them to be riding bikes out there without me. But I could feel it, even though I intellectually knew better that they were going to be fine. So I actually highly recommend the book Free Range Kids by Lenore Skenazy. And she does quite a bit on the statistics and the overblown fears. It's almost like there's some hoaxes out there, like the dangerous Halloween candy and things like that. But these the decades, probably the last 20 to 30 years have really become about parenting by fear, which is part of the intensive parenting, which is a controlling style of parenting. So this is how it's all kind of linked together. But when we can step back and question the fear a little bit, and first we have to notice and recognize, okay, I'm scared something bad is going to happen to my child. And then we do, I think, need to push ourselves a little bit to sit with that fear. And maybe it's in, increments. So you don't like throw a kid who can't swim into the deep end, but maybe letting your 8-year-old ride their bike around the neighborhood for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
See how it feels, I mean, I have to tell you, this summer with the schedule, working from home and having 3 kids, I have one in camp every day, the youngest, and then the other 2 are kind of living their lives. I am not going to drive them everywhere. So they have to figure out how they're going to do activities and get around. And I'm taking a very hands-off approach, and they're making it work. So that's an example of, I have my boundary around my work time being valuable and important, and I'm not going to sacrifice it. And it expects them to be independent. And I have to be comfortable knowing that they're riding their bikes and out and about for hours at a time. And it's a good process for all of us.
It is a good process. I remember when my youngest was, she was like in 8th grade, I think. And that's really when moms of tweens and teens group really took off. And I wasn't as available to her. And I remember that it was kind of like, it was a bumpy ride at first because she had doctor's appointments. So I was even having her keep track of when there was appointments, when she had to get somewhere, when she didn't. And I remember like we missed something. It was like, it was a little rocky, but she became so capable where I was doing so much more for my older two. And she learned how to manage it. And, so it's going to be bumpy,
right?
Beginning, but just letting them do more. And just like, you have to, and,
right.
And it's good when we can have our own lives.
Absolutely. And what message are we sending our kids that we don't because of their needs? That, okay, well, I won't do my work and I won't hang out with my friends and I won't, go on a weekend away because you need me.
Yeah. We want to inspire them, I think, to, see us living our own lives and whatever that looks like.
Right. And like you're saying, it's amazing what kids are capable of, and we just don't give them enough credit. I think it's really questioning our own assumptions about kids' capabilities. I mean, for example, we are well into, my girls at least, packing their own luggage for vacations. And it is just such a lifesaver. It's already too busy getting ready for trips, And then my son, my 8-year-old, he packed his own luggage this time when we just went away. And we were too busy to check because there was a lot going on. And he forgot a couple of important things. But, he learned. And there were still stores where we were. So it wasn't a disaster. But it was kind of good that he just kind of had to do it. And he'll probably remember those things next time.
Exactly. I'm laughing because I remember letting my kids start packing and that happening, like, oh, I forgot underwear.
Yeah.
Like, okay. Or I have one pair and it's a pair I have on. So what are we going to do about this? But they learn, they're not going to forget it next time. So I just, I love it. Well, Emily, tell them where to find you. I just want to say, I love your blog. It has so many great articles. Your Instagram, where to find you, where they can pre-order your book.
Sure. So my website where my blog is EmilyEdlynn.phd.com. And then I actually have a Substack newsletter if people are interested in subscribing. So that's just, I think, Emily Edlynn on Substack. And then I am on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook at Dr. Emily Edlynn. So people can find me all over the place. Oh, and pre-order my book on Amazon, Bookshop, Target.com. So it's pretty much out there where you can find books.
That's great. Yeah. So you have to write it down. Autonomy-Supportive Parenting. Just a great book and super, super helpful. And I love how you say this is a process.
Yes.
So good. So we have to remember that. And just keep on helping them to be independent.
Yes, we're never done. It's never over.
Exactly. Yeah, no, we're always parents.
Yes.
So thank you, Emily, so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.